So the two articles that Natalie and I chose are why do you flap your fingers and hands in front of your face, and why don't you make eye contact when you're talking?
The first one we started discussing was why don't you make eye contact when you're talking? And we got into what it means to make eye contact and how that's changed. Jan brought up the point that in some Asian cultures, it's actually considered disrespectful to make eye contact with someone while you're talking to them. And we kind of went off of that and how even in previous times where there was nobility, if you were from a different level, like social economic level or social
Yeah,
status,
like the whole relationship of servant and nobility, like the servants were not allowed to look in the eye of the whoever they were serving on. Like that would be considered disrespectful as well.
mm-hmm. But now we've escalated to a point where it doesn't matter. That stuff doesn't matter. You have to make eye contact with someone when you're speaking to them, or it's disrespectful. When it kind
It
of,
will like infer some sort of equalness among the individuals. Like we're equal, we're the same. That's why we look at each other in the eyes when we talk.
and it's interesting because in a way, this concept of making eye contact when speaking to someone, it just sort of became the thing that we do. Before it was disrespectful, and now it's considered disrespectful not to do it. And it's not even something that you're taught. I mean, typically in schools, they don't tell you you need to look at me when I'm talking to you unless you're being reprimanded.
Hmm.
And if you're not being reprimanded, in a way, you just sort of know that you need to make eye contact with someone when they're speaking to you. But where did this even come
Yeah,
from?
it's not like as you said, like in the schools they do it, but it's not something that is taught at school. It's something that we just like it comes from the parents and the parents' parents and so forth on. So
Socially ingrained mannerism.
that's that's right.
So then we got into discussing, so why does eye contact imply listening? And in a way, I sort of don't agree with the idea that if I'm not looking at you, that doesn't mean that I'm not paying attention to you. The way that the author describes it in the article, he writes, voices may not be visible things, but we're trying to listen to the other person with all of our sense organs. When we're fully focused on working out what the heck it is you're saying, our sense of sight sort of zones out. If you can't make out what you're seeing, it's the same as not seeing anything at all. So I feel like what he's saying is that by not looking at the person that he's speaking to or who's speaking to him, he's able to understand that person better than if he's actually looking at them. And in a way, I agree with that idea. Like, we came to the point where it has to do with being oversensitive to different stimuli. And in a way, if they're not looking at a person, because a person is so changing, there's a constant change in everything that's going on. When you're looking at someone's face, you see how their face is moving, and then they also can become distracted by other things. But if you pick like a fixed point to look at while someone is speaking to you, you're able to really hear what it is they're trying to say and analyze what they're saying, how they're saying it.
Yeah, the same thing with the overstimulate that happens like sometimes with the visual. It's gonna be like an overload for them. It's just better like just the whole situation of us being there by them changes their environment, their whatever they're perceiving. Like they're aware that we're there. They're aware that we're there for a reason, and we're gonna either interact with them or not interact at all, or we're next to them. Like they know.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like they are some not or anything like that.
No, I mean, it doesn't. In some cases, I can understand why you would think that if they're not looking at you, they're not listening to you. Because a lot of times when parents reprimand their child, they kind of get offended that they're being reprimanded and they look away as if to not pay attention. But other times, it's just like, I'm not looking at you because I'm listening to what you're saying and how you're saying it, which is what he's saying. And I kind of agree with that. Not only socially, but even in music. I mean, I kind of don't like to look at something that's moving when I'm playing or follow the music once I've memorized something. Even though, yeah, it's good to have the score, but I would rather fixate on something and really just be able to feel what it is that I'm doing and feel what's going on versus having to constantly have my brain doing lots of different things. And I feel like that's what's going on. He wants to just listen. He doesn't want to have anything else interrupting him. Was there anything else here that we wanted to
Mm.
that? You brought up the point of the other ways to assure listening.
Oh yeah, that's when we want to make sure that whatever we're saying goes through and it's processed or in their own way, like depending on the student or the children, uh, how to make sure that they understood like visual cues or something or like whatever they did, like they had the softwares or pictures or anything. So
Or even
it's just not necessarily like, okay, look at me and make sure make sure you understand, but find different ways to so we make sure
simply
that
asking them.
yeah.
I mean, if you
Yeah,
have them repeat,
yeah, that could be
well,
one
that's
repeating.
difficult though because sometimes they may not
Sometimes
be
they're not
verbal,
verbal. Yeah,
but they even have their own ways of communicating, and at that point, it really gets down to
yeah.
knowing the
That's what I mean. That's
child.
what I mean by knowing the individual,
Mm-hmm.
knowing what he's capable of, and try to find a way to within his medium how to communicate with him. So for that's for the eye contact one. Now, why do you flat your fingers and hands in front of your face?
So the first thing that we got into, I mean, immediately after watching the videos that we saw in class, stimming, and the flapping the fingers in front of the face kind of felt like a form of stimming, but the way that it's kind of portrayed here, in a way, when you read this, you kind of get the idea that doing this is not acceptable. And it goes down to the point of why. It's a form of stimming, but everybody does it. So why are some of them okay and some not?
Yeah, like not even that, because in some instances, not even for people when they already had the shaky leg or the biting nails or anything, some people get bothered by that, like, hey, stop doing that or stop moving or whatever. So it's just it's just like try to find a way we deal with it in a classroom situation. You try to find the source of why is the student anxious or try to whenever it becomes distracting to the other students. This
The
case being
severity.
the severity and also like if it's an inclusive setting or it's it's the other one. The,
The self-contained classroom. What I felt like with this was really, yeah, going back to the severity of the form of stimming. Here it's flapping the fingers in front of the face. And it says they do it because of the way that the way that they feel the light that's shining. He writes, flapping our fingers and hands in front of our faces allows the light to enter our eyes in a pleasant filtered fashion. And then he goes on to say, but unfiltered direct light sort of needles its way into the eyeballs of people with autism in short, straight lines. This actually makes our eyes hurt. So I think also applying this to a music or to a classroom setting in a way that also again comes down to knowing your student, knowing what it is that they can handle, what makes them comfortable, and kind of adjusting for that, making taking that into account when you're setting up your classroom. If having bright lights is too triggering for behaviors that
well,
are not acceptable in the classroom,
there's
then
when the
look for other ways.
collaboration comes to play an important role in the whole
Yeah.
learning process of things.
So you need to get to know the student and then come up with other ways. And if it's not necessarily in a classroom, but maybe in a public setting. Socially, it's not acceptable to behave like this. Whenever it happens in public, you usually kind of see other people staring.
Yeah, it calls attention, but at the same time, it's that the people around are not educated. They're ignorant to this issue that the student has autism or whatever. It is like immediately when they see a behavior like that, like okay, something's wrong. What's wrong? Oh, okay, whatever. Like,
Mm-hmm.
or it has to do also with behavior. Like most of the whatever is not visual to us, it's like, oh, what's going on, and then we get to think, oh, maybe he had autism, or maybe he have what's the other one? Um,
Asperger's?
no, the mental retardation.
Intellectual disabilities.
Because we don't
Mhm.
see it. That's one of the problems that also arises when there's in my chapter that I'm covering the physical disabilities. That is something that you see, but at the same time, beyond the physical disability, there's also a problem, the emotional struggle of the students, because it's something that is seen and it's something that society immediately, oh, poor kid, he doesn't have legs, or he cannot walk, or he cannot, like, that's why the whole purpose is to create that conscious and that awareness around us.
And there's probably to make. Well, what I really liked about both of the articles was the way that they were written. The language that's used is very poetic, and I thought that was an interesting kind of thing to take a look at because the author appears to be someone who has autism. So, from what I know so far about this book, it was written by that person who had this disability. And I just think it's really interesting to see how they use these kinds of these terms, like he puts it enters our eyes in a pleasant filtered fashion, and it feels like light that reaches us like this feels soft and gentle like moonlight. It's very descriptive in different ways, and I find that really interesting because if you were to probably pull someone off the street and ask them to describe what does light feel like, or what does almost anything feel like, it's probably not going to be as poetic as this. And it really changes, I mean, for me, it changes my perspective of communication with people with disabilities because it's not one of the first things most people see is, oh, that person has a disability, they're incapable of functioning at a level. And in a way, it depends on the disability, but with autism specifically, people look at it like, oh, the person can't do something, but this actually proves that they can. I mean, the way that this is written was beautiful, and it's interesting because it just kind of shows that even though they're nonverbal, as the author here was nonverbal, it doesn't mean that they don't have an understanding of language. If anything, I felt like he has a little bit more of an understanding of language because it's the only thing he can use to communicate. He can't verbalize, he can't use tonal inflection to make his point. He can only use words to describe how he sees things and how things appear to be to him and how they feel. And it was very interesting to me.
That makes sense. I'll agree in in the way that you see it, and probably I now, on the other hand, like I'm pretty hesitant, or say it's subjective or objective. You know, you have to see things like from a point of view where I don't know, because sometimes it can be a little bit embellished by the publishers or editor or whoever assisted the student to, or the child writing this. So I mean, anyway, the message got through the and spread it, you know. So
Yeah, like the
it works.
message, I felt like the message from this was not only the explanation of the different kinds of things that we see people with autism doing, but also in a way kind of saying, look, we're capable of functioning and we're capable of doing everything else that you can do. We just approach it differently. And that was my take from the way that it was written. I really liked it.
Mm, it was poetic.
It was poetic.
Okay, thank you.